female, whatever, double.
Red bags are good.
No, I can't do that because I end up getting bloody nose. I tried it this morning. I gotta ask somebody, so.
The Blaine, asphalt, you're taking asphalt, me too. Okay, me too.
Great, we're going to get rolling. Thank you for spending part of your Saturday morning with us. We're running under about 2 hours on this, maybe about an hour and 15 minutes just for the talk part, but we'll hang out for the full time to answer any questions you may have. First, I'll take any extra surveys if you have them completed. I guess you can give them to Nicole back here. And first, I'd like to introduce our team. I'm Damon Hall. I'm an assistant professor at St. Louis University in the Center for Sustainability. This is Gerardo Camilo. He's an associate professor of biology at St. Louis University. And we have graduate students with us who are Paige Muniz, master's student in biology, Molly Lacob, who's a master's student in sustainability, and Nicole Shea, master's student in sustainability. What if we could just go quickly around and just say your names? We can start with you on the end here, just so we get an idea of
I
who's
knew
here.
there was a reason not to sit here.
Never sit in the front.
First, my name's Ann High, and I live over on the corner of Potomac and Sulphur.
Tom Nagel, live on Arthur.
Christine Nagel with him.
Dave Fernandez, we live by Chippewa Macklin.
Okay,
Donna with him.
great.
Ed Knapp, I live a couple doors up from Mom's Deli.
Okay.
Mom's Deli.
Deb Lowe's and I live on Maple.
Yeah, Milton Murray, a Lindenwood co-leader with Lindenwood Park Community Garden over on Smiling. I live on Bardell. My partner Sharon.
Hey, I get to say that.
What
do you think there's
Yes, Gracie.
Yes, Gracie.
I'm Jenny. I live Sutherland, down from Mom's Deli.
Charlene, I live back in the Tower Grove South neighborhood.
Great.
My name's Melody. I live on Humphrey.
Laura Haneke, we're on the first long block of Arsenal.
I live across the street and down about 4 houses.
Okay,
I don't know.
nice.
My name's Mandy. I live at the corner of Bradley Ave and Humphrey.
Great.
I'm Bill Wilson, I live on Arthur, and this is Sophia, and she lives on Bluff.
Andy Yor, I live in the Holly Hills neighborhood and I missed the meeting yesterday.
No problem, welcome. Great, thank you. I want to, as a way of asking why you're here, I want to ask, was there some sort of aha moment that you may have had about bees or about pollinators? Something that you heard or saw? What was your aha moment?
The whole, when my tomato production went down. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and other people agree with that?
Yeah.
Totally.
I've noticed fewer bees this year, like especially in the spring. Some of the flowers I have that they are normally on, I didn't see as many.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm with them.
Oh, noticing, yeah.
I think it's just the accumulation of seeing stuff, news items about the problem and the hive collapse or whatever, that hive problem, and and so you read it once and then you see it again, and it just all of a sudden it's like, oh, but this might be something I could do something about compared to so much else.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, and that's really kind of my big reason for being here. I'd seen, at the Missouri Botanical Garden and in the news and so forth about the problems that the bees are facing. But I always was kind of skeptical that in my little corner of the world, I could do anything that would make it better. And so I've been trying to do some things, and so I'm here for more ideas.
Great. We agree. There is something that can be done, and we'll talk about that. Just get through the first 10 minutes of gloom here. There's a rainbow at the end of this storm. My aha moment was when I was an undergraduate at Purdue University. As my full-time job, I was a beekeeper. And so I had, my job was to manage 115 hives. I worked for a honeybee geneticist. And so part of my job, in addition to managing these hives and checking for queens every week, was to make sure that these hives overwinter successfully. So I'd prepare the hives, I would make sure the enclosure was closed up so no rodents could get in, and make sure the lids and everything were straight on it, and then we'd treat them in order to make sure they're healthy throughout the winter. And the first spring that I did that, prepared all the hives, we had about 97% of them came back and they were healthy and they made it through the winter. The following year, my second year on the job, I had to travel when we were to overwinter the hives. And so my boss overwintered the hives and all prepared them. And then when I opened them up in the spring the following year, I think this was 1999, we had, oh, here's me. We had 70% loss. So 70% of all our hives died.
Whoa.
And so, being a arrogant 20-year-old, I thought, well, my boss, he has a PhD in genetics, but he didn't know anything about beekeeping. I should have done it. But that's really when we were just beginning to learn about colony collapse disorder, or the hive collapse disorder, and some of the other pests that were affecting bees, and kind of the death by 1,000 cuts affecting honeybees. 13, 14 years later, I was at SLU and met Gerardo Camilo, and it turned out Gerardo had done the exact same thing when he was an undergraduate student, but at Texas A&M. Here's a file picture of him.
Oh, wow.
1986. But what he found was that he never had that type of loss. Didn't experience the colony collapse like we were in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so that was really an aha moment. I since went on after beekeeping to study environmental policy and social sciences. Gerardo's still been studying entomology. And so what we're going to talk with you about today is how we've been combining our most recent research to really try to understand what's going on with pollinator populations in general. All right, we can start. So you have heard kind of the on the news the story of pollinator losses. And of course, we know the importance is really to food security. 1 in every 3 bites of food we eat is from a plant, fruit, vegetable that is pollinated by a bee. So there are a number of these images that show, life with your breakfast with bees and your breakfast without bees. And then the value of U.S. crops that depend on these invisible services or ecosystem services of bees, wild pollinators, as well as honeybees, is $18.9 billion, and this figure is a few years old, actually. Here's another image, shows your vegetable and fruit choices without, with bees and then without bees. This is from Whole Foods. And then another stand here, with bees, without bees. And then this quote by Einstein: if the bee disappears from the surface of the earth, mankind would have no more than 4 years to live. Just emphasizing the importance of pollinators in our diet and our food security. In some places, pollinator populations have dropped so much that people are beginning to hand pollinate. And I know we've spoken with folks that are hand pollinating some of their fruits and vegetables because of the declines of pollinators, but it's happening at a commercial scale. This is apples in China, and then these are oranges in China. A lot of research has just recently been coming out about the extent of the declines of wild bees and native bees. This just came out this year. The yellow shows the losses and declines in the abundance, the amount of wild bees, and you can see where we are kind of in between these large yellow areas. And if you know your agricultural geography, you know that this is why we have great produce in the winter and the fall. This is the Central Valley of California. Here are the apples, as well as grapes. I know hops are up in here as well. Cotton, rice, and then the bread basket. And then I know there's lots of fruits and vegetables down in here as well.
Do you have the same kind of a map from Mexico? Because I see a lot of our fruits and vegetables come from Mexico, probably especially in the winter.
Yeah, I
Do
don't
you have a
have.
partnership with them? Because that's a
There's-
concern. That's where a lot of our stuff comes from.
We sadly, once you get to Mexico and Central America, the amount of research is very minimal. But from the anecdotal evidence I've heard, is that they've also have experienced significant decline. In the United States, definitely Canada, Europe, so worldwide. there's significant decline.
So there are many causes of these loss of native pollinators. Number one is habitat loss. You have land that was once fields that had flowers, and now they've been transformed in some other land use. That makes sense. That's the largest cause. In that habitat loss as well, changes in agricultural practices. We've just become extremely effective at farming and extremely efficient to where now we can, you think back to the family farm in the 1920s, teens, looks very different than the farms of today where there was a back 40 acres and there were plenty of fence rows. Now with the technologies we have, we can farm right up to the fence rows in ways unlike before. Also, land use intensification. Like I said, more acres can be put into production, and so some of those areas that may have had, say, fence rows for milkweeds, are no longer there. They're in production. Secondly, a large cause is the chemical industry advances. There's just been tremendous technological advances really within the past 30, 40 years that have allowed us to be more effective at managing insects and pesticides as well as with herbicides. And they're always at our fingertips, unlike any other time. And then third are bee diseases and pests. And because there are species of bees that are treated like livestock, so honeybees, and now even bumblebees and some others, leafcutter bees, because they get transferred around, certain diseases and pests can be transferred as well. And that's just common with any domesticated animal, really. And then fourth, there's a lack of flowers. Simply a lack of flowers is why there are declines in populations of bees. And then fifth, there are others, both known and unknown. And we've got many, many papers on just different causes it could be, to where some folks have said and called it a death by 1,000 cuts. So this is just an image to show habitat loss and some of the, and just how recent this phenomenon is. The acres in grassland, wetlands, shrublands that have been converted to crops by county. It was 2008 to 2011, so this is just a short period of time, very recent. And you can see in the breadbasket kind of where we've had a lot of those losses. If you remember that earlier figure, I'll show it again. These have been converted. And if you know something about that time period and you're thinking about the grain belt of the country, anyone have an idea, like 2008, maybe 2005, 6, 7, you recall what was the hot issue in agriculture and energy?
Ethanol.
Yes, absolutely. Yep, biofuels, ethanol, putting greater percentage of ethanol. That was a federal policy that allowed, I think it went from 5% to 15%, and then that encouraged different subsidies, which just changes the way that we use land. And that's just what happens when you have different types of policies. So that's habitat loss. Secondly, the neonicotinoids, since about 1992, there's been a brand new entire class of insecticides. They were never before on the market, now they're on the market. They're nicotine-based chemicals, introduced in the 90s, systemic insecticides. So they're systemic, meaning they go throughout the system, the entire system of the plant. And they can be coated on the seed. And what happens is that the insecticide is in the roots, it's in the vegetation structures, in the leaves, it's in the flowers, and it's in the pollen, and it's in the nectar. And it's highly effective, it works very well. If there's a pest that bites the leaf, bites it, and then dies. But what we've also found is that the insecticide is persistent in the nectar and the pollen, so when the bees collect the pollen, take the nectar, they are not killed outright, but they're weakened. Their immune systems are weakened, and recent papers have come out that have said that there is an addictive quality to this neonicotinoids, and so they keep returning to it, as you would imagine, with a nicotine-based. So 1990, no one had heard of it, but now 1/3 of all global pesticide use, insecticide use, is one of these classes of neonicotinoids. So we went from 0 to 100 very quickly. This is from a paper from Dave Goulson. Wild bees, and particularly solitary bees, may be much more strongly affected than domesticated honeybees. And so that's something of concern for the wild and native bee populations. In fact, this chemical was banned by the European Union in 2013, even though the two world's largest producers are European countries. So Syngenta, which is Switzerland, and then Bayer from Germany. They still banned it. So you can see the increase, this graph here shows the increase of use on different types of crops. So really, 1992, 93, nothing. In 1994, vegetables and fruit. And then you can see that it started in with some cotton, and then orchards. All of these are bee dependent, with the exception of corn and grapes. But pastures and hay as well, very important. This is from the U.S. Geological Survey, 2016. They monitor all the pesticide use for water quality. They're concerned, their focus is on water quality. If you look at this, how widespread this usage of these new class of insecticides are, I think these maps kind of tell the story. So this is 1993, nothing. 1994 started with the apples, right? Some of the cotton and rice, the same down there. Here's where we are, and then here's where Purdue is. So you can kind of see what was happening in the world of 1999 and 2000. Then 1995, a lot of folks began, this is Central Valley, right? 98, 99, 2000, 2005, just a few years, 2010, and then this is 2013 data, the most recent data they have. And so you can see that if we put back the image of, again, breadbasket, Central Valley, apples, if you put back this image with this, kind of toggle back and forth, you can begin to see, maybe there's some correlation here. We have high use of these brand new chemicals that probably weren't tested on honeybees and bees, and we see some declines with that. So that's a part of the issue of the declines in wild bees. There was a map generated by the same authors of this paper that took the most wild bee dependent crops and they mapped them with the declines, and then they identified counties that were most at risk for losing their bee populations. And so those are in the darker red, but you can see these are whatever products are coming, agricultural products are coming out of these areas, these are at risk because of the loss of wild bees. And so we are kind of in a unique position, and I think that's really part of the hopeful part of what we're talking about in our research and what we're doing. So how does this affect you at home? Prices of food will rise, and they have been on the rise slowly. So here are almond prices, and you probably noticed this just in buying almonds. Just a steady increase. Almonds are pollinator dependent, in the case wild bee dependent, but also honeybee dependent. Their prices are raising, but this is not just fruits and vegetables, it's also for meat. So in feed of alfalfa, so the alfalfa bee is the dominant pollinator of alfalfa throughout the country, and as you go out through upper western, like in Montana, you'll see these bee houses for the alfalfa leafcutter bees. But that price as well has been steadily increasing over time. And so this affects the price of meat as well. So, oh boy. It's become an issue. It's been getting national and international attention. Time magazine has a cover story in 2013. The Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is a bunch of governments coming together with their lead scientists trying to figure out large-scale problems. The first report that they put out just a few months ago was about pollinators, the pollinator decline, so that's what they prioritized. There's been a national strategy. June 2014, the White House got together all the land management agencies that could do something about this problem. So Department of Transportation, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Interior, which has national parks and land management. Got them all together and said, we've got to figure out what we can do. Strategy was released in 2015, and then just last month they put out an action plan. And so we see our work as informing that and being informed by this as well. So really what our question is, and the basis of our research is, Can we plant our way out of this pollinator health crisis? We know it's a problem. What can we do about it? And what roles can cities play? And this may seem like a funny question, but this will become clear when Gerardo talks. How can we develop communities in ways that add bee habitat? Is there a way that we can develop housing projects or even neighborhoods in a way that's strategic for bee habitat that increases the flowers? And this project seeks to test all this at a very neighborhood, small scale. And so, with that, here's the outline of the workshop. I just introduced the question of what we're going to talk about. Gerardo will talk about the research, the bees of St. Louis, as well as Bee Biology 101. And then Paige will walk us through that card, the bee identification card, and talk about bee identification. And then I'll finish up and we'll talk about this study itself and what we think can be done to address this crisis.
Excellent. So I don't know if you've seen me in Lindenwood Park or Pernod, I'm the grown-up man with the little grown-up blanket.
It's not a fishing net either, right?
No, it's very, very thin mesh. I'm, as Damon said, I've been working with insects for a long, long time, to the point my mom is hoping I outgrow that face.
I guess she was
And get a real, totally, get a real
Good
job.
job.
So myself and my students, we've been collecting insects and now specifically bees all over the city. We've collected in city parks. We have collected, we have started, we switched a very specific emphasis to community gardens in 2013 when we realized that, that's where the action was. And we've also been looking at urban farms. So these are larger, so it's much more intense. And the purpose of these, of course, to sell produce at, farmers market. We've also been looking at prairie pockets. So these are areas that have been reestablished with native wildflowers. And now, more recently, this year, we're also looking at the role that vacant lots have, specifically in the north side of the city, but also in the central corridor. It's important. So how do we go around doing this stuff? So I have literally an army of undergrad students during the summer. We get in the lab, we have to organize, which teams will go to which place. Each team will hit anywhere between 2 or 3 different locations each day. When you hear busy as a bee, that's a big lie. Bees keep bankers' hours. Okay? A bee doesn't really come out till 10 in the morning. That's like 10:50. By 3 o'clock, they're done. Buzz by 2. It's good enough. If it is cloudy, I'm not going out today. It's not enough. And there are many reasons for that. But that allows us to follow them very, very efficiently. So you go out, you go with the nets. So this is Earth Dance Farms out in Ferguson. And, you see that even though this is a working urban farm, they have many areas that just let weeds and plants, grow wild. We go sample many, you can see total urban setting. We get any one location. We spend anywhere from half hour if it's small community garden up to 2 hours out in Ferguson. You collect the bees. They come into these nets. They're very, very fine mesh because see some of the bees are really teeny tiny, so you cannot escape. And then we put them in a kill jar that has a chemical that kills the bees. And it's part of the reason why I am part of the collapse. No, we at any one time we only collect anywhere between 20 and 100 bees, depending on the size, not that many. But you can see there's all these various urban settings that you really do not suspect should have a large diversity of bees and large abundance of bees, especially when you consider traditional agricultural areas. Okay? So you come back into the lab, We have to then sort the bees and pin them and identify them and put them into appropriate trays. Then we spend a significant amount of time looking at the bees under microscope and identifying them, measuring them, so on and so forth. All the good stuff that we scientists like to do. And at the end of the day, you end up with essentially, something like this, in which, for example, these are bumblebees. Every single bumblebee that you see in this tray is just one species of bumblebee, so I know which bumblebee came from which garden when. And we've been doing this now for going on our 4th year. And you start looking at these numbers, you start looking at the species list, and you start realizing, St. Louis has a lot of bees. Much more so than the surrounding suburbs, and much more so than the surrounding agricultural areas.
That seems backwards.
Totally. Because that's not what I learned when I was taking ecology as an undergrad, 35 years ago. So you're like, scratching your head, what the hell is going on? And then I start talking to other colleagues that are doing similar work, in California, Gordon Franke, my current postdoc now, Rebecca Tonieto in Chicago, colleagues in New York, San Francisco, Phoenix, and then we start expanding and realize that Europe is in the same boat. Literally, all of England is in the same boat. The large bee diversity resides in their cities, not in agricultural areas. We've seen the same thing in Australia, in Latin America, and in Canada. So we're like literally itching, scratching our heads, what the hell is going on? Cities then are becoming a refuge for bees. So much so that now we're thinking that if we start changing, as we start putting bees as higher priority, cities may serve then as a source for recolonizing agricultural areas. Okay, so in order to get a little bit further, how come we have all these bees? One of the things we need to do is figure out, what is a bee and what's their role. Okay, so bees, you all have heard that bees are pollinators. Okay, well, what the heck is pollination? Pollination, no if, ands, or buts, is the way that plants have sex. Okay, there's nothing else than that. And you're trying to move the male cells, which are called the pollen, to the female part, which are the styles. So basically, moving the eggs, moving the pollen from one to the other. The easiest, the simplest way to do it is by wind. So you get the male flowers produce hordes and hordes of pollen, and this pollen is very, very thin and fresh, really easy, and you put lots of pollen into the air, and some of it, by chance alone, will hit a female flower. Oak is the classical wind pollinator. Back in April, you could come out to the car, and you see that car yellow, that yellow sheen all over. That's oak pollen. Okay. It's classical. But that is tremendously inefficient because you end up with a lot of your pollen on top of people's cars. It's not going to do any good there. So there is something that we call directed pollination, in which you take advantage of a species, and you take that species moving the pollen from this flower to this flower. You don't need to produce as much pollen, and you ensure that that pollen gets there. And that's what we call animal pollination. And there's a whole host of ways and animals that do that. So the plants provide a reward, which is nectar, and the animal serves as a vector, moving the pollen from one flower to the other. And we have, classical pollinators being butterflies, regular flies are pollinators, birds, bats, and of course bees. And when you look through nature, you see that you have flowers that are very specific for bats. You have flowers that are more specific for birds. We call syndromes. And you have many flowers that are specific for bees. The bulk of everything we eat that requires pollinator is a bee pollinated flower. Very, very few things that we eat that are not bee pollinated. And of all these critters, bees are the only one that will intentionally and dedicatedly collect pollen. Everybody else's is just happenstance, it's just chance. Bats are a classical example. I work with bats, pollinating bats in the tropics. This bat you can see has a very long tongue to lift the nectar. But when they go in there, they're the anther, you can see the anther here. You get a face full of pollen and you can see that bat is like that, I mean, who wants to go there? It's like me taking a big pile of flour or sand, just blowing it in your face. I mean, that's not fun. You get it in your face, and then the bat is like scraping it, and then it comes over here and it moves it to this flower, and then the same thing happens. You exchange the pollen. It's not fun for the bat, and it works more or less okay. Alternatively, these critters are the only ones that intentionally collect pollen and move it to another flower. Therefore, the bulk of pollination in nature, and more specifically in agriculture, is done by these critters. And of the bees, only the females are the ones that collect pollen. And you can see this leg has all these hairs over here. The whole purpose of all those hairs is to gather the pollen there. You can see it much better. So this one is from St. Louis. This is called a sunflower bee. You can see it also in there. You can see that is just solid. There are probably tens of thousands of pollen grains there. Bumblebees have a slight variation of that, in which they gather the pollen into these little pockets. Other ones will do it all over the place, but bees are the only ones that can do it, and only the females. So one of the big questions that come around all the time is, well, how is it that bees know where to go and how to see? Well, most bee-pollinated flowers, when you put them under a UV light source, it looks like a aircraft carrier in the middle of the night. They have these landing patterns, these landing bands that say, this is where we go, and they go straight into that flower. It is because it reflects that UV light. Therefore, bees see in UV light. They don't see in regular light. So like in this room would literally look completely dark to them because there's no UV light, not much UV light here. That's why they don't come out until the sun is high enough in the sky, so you get the reflectance. And by the same token, many bees use the sun, the angle of the sun in the sky, to fly around, to orient themselves. And that's a good one. Alternatively, most bees will spend the bulk of their life in an area about the size of this room. In fact, many of them, the really tiny ones, they have a nest on the ground next to the plant they like, and they fly from the nest to the plant, and that's it. So they'll spend their life in an area this big. Some bees, the bulk of their life, they spend it in the shape of a larvae or a pupa, and then they emerge as an adult. Some live as short as a week. Some may live as long as 4 or 5 weeks as an adult. There's some of the time there's larvae or pupa in the ground or in the nest. So this is something that you'll notice. Many of your tomatoes were not emerging. You would see that by this time probably a lot of your tomato flowers don't look yellow and bright anymore. They kind of look cream color, and they start looking kind of like shriveling like this, or your pumpkin flowers, they go like that, you know, they start getting, they call senescence, aging, getting old flower, the flower gets like this and starts drooping. No, it's not, people think, oh, I'm not watering enough. No, you're watering plenty, it's just that your flower has not been pollinated. And that is something that, as you'll notice with the tomato, other people have noticed with the pumpkins around the city. But this is a very serious issue because as these things start decreasing in abundance, their prices, of course, increase. It's a matter of supply and demand.
Wait, before, I
Yeah.
have a question on the frequently asked questions. Can you talk about the effectiveness of pollination of like native bees?
Oh, okay, yes, thank you.
I was just thinking that same thing.
So one bumblebee, okay, again, going back to the fact that bees are lazy critters. A honeybee is the ultimate jack of all trades. The honeybee is like an average sized bee, is an average pollinator, but it can pollinate hundreds of different kinds of flowers. Alternatively, when it comes to tomatoes, one bumblebee is the equivalent of 40 honeybees. A bumblebee can actually come into the flower, it will buzz it, and when it buzzes it, the flower where the anthers, where the pollen is, those anthers burst, just so in a fraction of a time. So many times, you may not see bees in your tomatoes, but you're getting tons of tomatoes. It's just that a bumblebee just comes, they just,
Yeah, I've noticed in our community garden, bumblebees are the pollinator of the tomato plants.
Yeah.
You walk around, look at everybody's tomato plant, that's what's all working,
Yeah.
it's not honeybees.
We have a neighbor down the alley who has 3 hives, I think, or 4.
Mhm.
How far do those bees go?
So honeybees can potentially go up to 2 miles. Most of the time, they're within half a mile to a mile. Now, it all depends if there's plenty of resources nearby, they'll stay close. If you don't have too many resources, they really, really go far out. One of the issues we have in the city is that you may have a neighbor that has 3 or 4 hives, and then somebody 2 blocks away doesn't know that you have a neighbor that has 3 or 4 hives, and they also put 2 or 3 hives. And basically, there's not enough food in that area in between. They're competing against each other.
Is there a way to collect that information or to help people?
The best thing is to attend the St. Louis Beekeepers Association. They keep track of where the hives are and how many, because that becomes a very serious problem.
This is a Mennonite couple, and it could be where they worship down in Fredericktown, maybe, that people talk down there too.
Mhm.
Okay, good.
Yeah, there's a beehive right outside the window.
Oh, yeah, yes. This one's I know, I've seen them.
I have another question that's more for the nerds in the room. Could you talk about the nutritional value of pollen and like why bees collect it and how they use it?
Okay, so you know, especially Paige will talk a little bit about generalists versus specialists. But when it comes to honeybees are like us. We are omnivores. Okay, not only are we omnivores, we need to have a very wide range. I mean, you need to eat your fruits and veggies, and you need to eat your meats and dairies and grains, and so we have this very broad range of nutritional requirements. And honeybees are very much like that. Honeybees require pollen and nectar from different kinds of plants because some pollen will provide some vitamins, but other pollen will provide different kinds of protein, and then some nectar will provide some, you know, vitamin C or whatever. So they need to have this broad range of different kinds of pollen in order to be healthy. And one of the things we happen when you only plant corn for for thousands and thousands and thousands of acres, the only pollen they have is, corn pollen. And corn doesn't provide any nectar. So, it's when you're eating, and there was a great experiment back in the 19 teens in Mississippi, in which they told prisoners that if they join this experiment, they will get their sentences cut in half. All they had to do is eat corn, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 30 days. By the middle of the experiment, something like 150 of them sign up. By the middle of the experiment, most of them have dropped out. Only 2 inmates made it to the end of the experiment, and within a week, 1 had died. And
They say, how
then
sick were they at that point?
horribly sick.
Malnutrition.
Malnutrition. So the same happens when a bee is only eating one source of pollen, one source of nectar. The same happens, that their health drops tremendously. So that's why we need lots of different kinds of flower. Okay, I'm gonna let Paige take over, because this is definitely her expertise, much greater than mine.
Now the fun begins. Okay, so just gonna go over a little bit of identification, some fun facts about our Missouri native bees and wild bees, and how to identify a bee. What's a bee compared to a fly, bee, wasp? So bees and flies, as you can see here, this fly actually mimics a bee. One thing to look for is the wings. So flies have 2 wings, where bees have 4. And sometimes you think, oh, on a flower, how am I going to notice? But you can kind of see how they stick. They stick, I guess, just straight up from the body, kind of on the fly. They just kind of go out like this. Where bees tend to have them like this or up like this, and flies will do this. So that's one thing when they're around. If you're watching them on a flower, that's one thing to look for. Also, the noise they make, flies make a very high-pitched buzzing sound, so it's kind of like, where bees are more like, so that's one thing. Also, the antenna. Bees have these really elongated antenna, elongated antenna, and flies don't. They have these little short nubs on their head. And flies, the term bug eye, I'm pretty sure comes from flies, because their eyes are just huge. And bees, you can see they're more slender and more to the sides of their heads. Again, bees collect pollen intentionally, so the females will usually be loaded with pollen, where flies, they may have a couple pollen grains, but you wouldn't even be able to see that if you're just watching them on a flower. Now wasps are a little, I would say a lot, you can definitely tell a wasp from a bee, I would say. Wasps are very slender. They have this little waist here, this thin little waistline. That's one key sign of a wasp, where bees are more round and robust. Again, wasps do not collect pollen, so they're pretty much hairless all around. They may have a few hairs on their bodies, but up here on this part of the body here, but nothing on their hind legs, where a bee would have a ton of pollen and a ton of hairs there. So those are some signs. So this is a representative of my aha moment of being interested in bees, was just looking at the diversity that's out there. There are a ton of different bees. They come in different color, shape, sizes. They're fascinating. Here, I'm sure some of you have bee blocks for the orchard bee. This is what the orchard bee looks like. Not this big, fortunately. In the United States, we have, or North America, we have roughly 4,500 different types of bees. The honeybee is just one species, so that's just one type. Everything else is a different kind of bee. And when you say honeybee, so like the Africanized honeybee, European honeybee, they're essentially listed as the same. Well, and they haven't gotten to Missouri yet, but Missouri, we have 450 different types of bees. And in St. Louis, Ronald Plaza, St. Louis, we have 150 of those species, and we're still counting. So it's pretty amazing. So when I was talking about the different colors, shapes, and sizes, this is just a fun photo here of the largest bee in North America and the smallest. This bee here is the carpenter bee. So it's this size. So that tiny little bee up there just fits right there. We don't get that little one here that's found in the southwestern United States, but it's just a pretty amazing picture. So bee basics. When a lot of people think about bees, they tend to think about these big colonies and honeybees or bumblebees and the queen and worker system. But our bees are actually 90% of our bee species are solitary bees. So what that means is it's one female to a nest, and she lays her eggs. The eggs develop into adults. They fly off. The newly emerged adults fly off and find their own nest, so they don't stay. Where the social bees, like the honeybees and bumblebees, the queen will go out, forage, lay her eggs. They emerge as adults, and then they do the work and they come back. So that's the worker queen system. Also, they don't live in hives. 70% of the solitary bees don't live in hives, and most of them live in the ground. So you just have these little holes in the ground, and further down in the presentation you'll see different slides of different images of what their nests look like. But in the springtime you can kind of see them out in your yard and going in and out of the grass. You think they're just little flies, but if you kind of get down there, you can see they're little bees. So again, the life cycle of a solitary bee. Overall, from the egg to adult stage, it's about a year long. So you'll have bees that will overwinter as either larvae or as adults, and then they'll emerge next year and start foraging. So the female leaves the nest, she starts foraging, and the main thing about why they're collecting pollen is because they feed that pollen. That's what their larvae eat, is the pollen. So that's why it's extremely important to have pollen resources for the bees, because they have to have the bees for the the pollen for the next generation. And that's solitary, social, all bees. So the adults will leave the nest, and they'll find their own nest and kind of do the same cycle. And on average, they're out for about 4 weeks as adults throughout the year. And solitary bees especially, you'll see some groups of bees will be out earlier in the year, some different types of bees earlier in the year and later in the year. So it's extremely important to have, when you plant a garden, you want to plant for early spring and then late fall flowering plants, so to provide all those resources. So here are some examples of solitary nests. They nest in a variety of ways. Some are more like an apartment building. They all have the same entrance, and then they kind of go off into their own little cells. Others will have more like a little neighborhood, or they call it aggregation. So each has they all live together in the same area, but they have their own entrances.
That the picture from Mallinckrodt?
No.
No, that's not.
No, yeah. They all have their own little houses there. And this one's just one female right there. And then you also have the cavity nesters. So this would be where that orchard bee would live. Carpenter bees, everyone's favorite. And another type of carpenter bee, the smaller carpenter bee, they also, because they're smaller, but they also dig out the pith of the plants. So this life cycle of a social bee as in bumblebees. Honeybees are just so unique, they're not like anything else. But other social bees, bumblebees. So the female will emerge in the spring, and she'll emerge, she starts collecting pollen, so it's really important to have pollen resources for her. She's already been mated. She'll emerge, collect pollen, find a hole in the ground, or even at the above ground at the tuft of a tall grass area, lay her eggs and put the pollen baskets there, and then once her eggs emerge as adults, they fly off and they start doing the work, and then she keeps reproducing or producing the next generation after generation. And then at the end of the year, the new queen will go underground, and a lot of times they will overwinter in old rodent nests. So, and then she'll wait there until the spring and come out. So And their lifespan, you'll see bumblebees out all year round, but there's different types of bumblebees that will be out at different types of and times of year. And a queen could last a full summer. So, and here are examples of nests of social bees. So here, honeybees. This is just a cavity in a tree. So here's an example of an old rodent nest. Grasses or in the ground. If you at the end of when your leaf starts falling off your tree, it would be a good thing to leave just a little portion, just a little area of those leaves in part of your yard if you can, or maybe get one of the neighbors to allot a part of their yard for that, because a lot of times you'll get them nesting in the leaf piles. And then here is a bee that nested in a birdhouse at my parents' house. So also if you have my dad always used to like to take the old nest out of there after the bird was done, but now he doesn't because we realized that the bees actually will nest in there. And this is Beatrice, we named her Beatrice. So again, bumblebees, so social bees, these can be very confused with carpenter bees because they're roughly the same size, they're black and yellow, big, but a key thing to look for is the abdomen on a carpenter bee is super shiny because they don't have a bunch of hairs there. A bumblebee looks a matte coloration because they have a lot of hairs on their abdomen. And the abdomen is this part here, like the butt, I guess you could say. So that's one thing to look for. One thing to do, I know some people aren't big fans of dandelions, but especially the early spring queens, they love dandelions. So that's a good nectar and pollen source for them. What else? Oh, and Monarda, so bee balm. They love that. That's early spring. And penstemon. So, what's it? Penstemon? What's it called?
Beer tongue.
Beer tongue. They like that. Carpenter bees. So, again, these are the big ones. And we have the small one, the Ceratina here. The small carpenter bee. These ones will nest in your deck. And a lot of times people are really scared. They're like, oh my gosh, they're like termites, But again, they're solitary, so they don't live in big colonies. And their nests the hole's probably about this big, maybe about that big. And it's, I don't know, roughly that deep, I would say. She lays about 3 eggs in there, so maybe like this long. But, so it doesn't go very far. A lot of times the next generation will reuse the nest or different nests, so they're not drilling a bunch of holes and going through the deck like termites would. The little carpenter bee, that's about the size of my pinky fingernail, so it's a lot different size than the carpenter bee. But those, if you have like a blackberry bush, I would recommend cutting it back at the end of the year if you already don't, because they tend to overwinter there, and then they make their nest in those types of bushes throughout the year in twigs. So. Also, the carpenter bees can come off as being aggressive and very scary if you're out on your deck, especially I noticed in early spring. The males, you can tell a male from a female because the males have this yellow patch on their face. And I don't know if you can see it now, but we have a ton over there you can look after. But the males kind of have this they come out and they do this, and they kind of get in your face if you're out on your deck. They're just looking for a female. And it's kind of funny because you'll watch them do that, and then you'll see a bird fly by, and they'll go after the bird. They don't know the difference. You can take a pebble and toss it up. You can kind of catch the
Dumb male.
Oh yeah, and males don't sting. So yeah, that's exactly. So they seem scary and aggressive when they're doing that, but they don't sting. You could catch it as long as they have the yellow one. So these are a fun group, leafcutter bees. These collect pollen on the underside of their abdomens here. So instead of having the hair on their hind legs, they have these hairs on their abdomen here. They will, as the name suggests, cut portions of the leaves out. So if you see anything like this on the sides, you know a leafcutter bee has been there. And they don't they're solitary. So it's not a huge colony of thousands of them coming and chewing up your plants, But that's also one thing to think about. So they cut these leaves portions out to line their cells with. So a lot of them are cavity nesters, so in twigs as well. And you can see her taking in that leaf in there because she used it. She kind of chews it up and plasters it on there. And so that's one thing to consider when you're using, when you're spraying chemicals on your plants is, it could potentially have an effect on those nests. And this one is a wool carder bee. If you have, and this is, she collects these little hairs off of, if you all have lamb's ear, the little fuzzy plants, or any type of fuzzy plant, she collects those hairs there, and you can see a line, and she does the same thing, lines the nest. So, and that's just to keep out different fungus and different types of pests. And then you can tell if they've been there, because they'll have these little tracks on the leaves of just bare hair, little thin lines. And also the male of this species does the same type of thing that the carpenter bee does. He'll stand around those lamb's ear, and he'll knock off other bees that are there and go after them. So.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And you may have said it and I didn't catch it, but the leafcutter bees,
Mm-hmm.
is there a particular leaf that they go after? Or?
Not that I know of, no. I mean, yeah. Nothing in particular. Some, in this, I know in Turkey they have certain flowers that they're particularly like to use on their nest cells, but here, no.
Okay.
Yep. So here are the digger or mining bees, and as you could probably imagine, the digger bees generally nest in the ground. One thing to do for these bees, they usually come out very early in the spring, so plant apple trees or any type of flowering trees, early flowering trees. They did at Mallinckrodt this year after we told them, and we already found, I think, we added 3 new species to their list this year, just because, and they just had these little trees there that were flowering. And one way to identify these, a lot of times they look like honeybees, but one way to identify them on the flower is that they have these hairs that stick out, and they're usually dusted with pollen, where the honeybees and bumblebees, they have that wax-like structure there. It looks more like a little ball of wax. And also, they make this C formation on the plant when they're foraging. And honeybees
Okay.
kind of just go out straight, where these make more of a C shape.
So it's like red buds and Bradford pears
Yeah.
and all those are good ones too.
Yeah. So these ones are really robust fuzzy bees. I love this group because they have these. A lady yesterday described them as saddlebags on the side. Because they're this huge fuzzy hind legs. This is the sunflower bee. Most of this group are specialists on sunflowers. So what that means is that they'll collect pollen only from flowers that are related to sunflowers. Where the honeybee and most bumblebees are generalists, so they'll go to any type of flower to collect the pollen. And one way to identify these, again, is by those really robust hind legs. And the males have they're called longhorn bees because they have these super elongated antennae. Also, males of all bees tend to just buzz around really quickly. They'll just go like this around the flowers. You can barely see them, and they'll stop on one for a minute, and that's when you can check the longhorns, but after that, they're just buzzing around. And these tend to be a little bit larger, too. Squash bees, this is fun. They're called squash bees because they only collect pollen from squash plants. And if you have squash plants, and you'll notice that the flowers kind of close like this. Well, even today when you get home, if you have them, go in and open them up. A lot of times you'll find the bees inside, and generally the males, because the males will sleep in there, and they'll either sleep in there at night, and then during the day they'll stay in there and wait for a female to come in. Yeah.
It's a rotten.
Yeah.
I have a question, like specifically about these and the sunflower bees, and I don't know, it's just not making sense to me. So they need it at all different times, but like around here, sunflowers are only going to start blooming like now. What have they been doing for?
So they're not.
They're somewhere else.
Out. Yeah, they're still underground, or wherever.
Oh, so they're not even.
They're not out yet.
Okay.
Yeah, so bees will come. That's why it's really important to have a variety of flowers throughout the year, because like the early spring bees, some of them are only out for 2 weeks in early spring. Yeah.
Okay, so
and
they
then,
each have their own time period.
Right.
Too.
Exactly.
Okay,
yes.
that's what wasn't making sense to me.
Yeah.
All right.
Exactly. Where bumblebees are out and honeybees are out all year round, carpenter
All the
bees,
time.
but a lot of the
Okay.
specialist bees are only out when their host plant is out.
So we just planted some sunflowers today and this week, so
Mhm.
they'll be ready in mid-September. So
Oh, you'll get
it'll
bees,
be,
yeah.
be a fall, winter food supply for.
That'll be perfect, yeah. Yep, and you should probably see the squash bee, a lot of the longhorn bees there, bumblebees for sure. Yeah, so, yeah, check in your squash plants to find these. And again, I didn't mention this, but the males of all, other than honeybees, because honeybees are just weird, but the males of all other bees, they don't go back to the nest. So it's important to provide an area like flowers, for example, because they'll sleep either inside the flowers or if you have like a coneflower, for example, they kind of go like this. They sleep underneath, or on, if you have tall grasses, it's good because they use their mandibles and they latch on, and that's where they sleep at night. So. And also the tall grass is good if you, bees don't really know when a random rainstorm's gonna come, so it's good to have. I love the prairie dropseed because it's a pretty grass and it provides a nice little umbrella. So I've seen, especially bumblebees, and I say especially bumblebees just because they're really obvious to see going in, but they'll go in there during a little rainstorm and hide, or underneath the coneflower, use it as a little umbrella.
What's the name of that drop seed?
Prairie dropseed.
Prairie drop seed?
Yeah. Yes.
It's a nice.
So it looks like with bees, the primary method sensor are their eyes. I mean, you say they have antennas, but do they use them in any manner to sense?
Yeah, so if you, it's hard to see.
No,
I've noticed
they
it.
don't have smell, do they?
They
yeah,
use their antenna.
They smell with their antenna.
Yeah. And so and for feeling, they use the antenna for a number of things, but if you ever see the bee, if you could see them in slow motion, or if you have a camera, just, snap some pictures as they're approaching the flower, because the first thing that's going out are their antenna. They're sensing, smelling what's there, feeling how close it is, so. And then also they have their eyes on the side of their head, and they also have these 3 little eyes, they call them little eyes here, and that's for sensing the light.
Okay, so they're getting a depth perception with their eye vision to the target they're going to.
No.
Or with their.
They cannot perceive that. Think about it like if it was like a screen.
2-dimensional.
So that's why you want to plant a patch of flowers, because a big patch can reflect a lot of UV light.
So they're doing the UV light reflection.
UV light reflection, and that brings them to, so you say, we have flowers here. And then they can see the landing pattern, but the question is where to land. That's the antenna. Because if the flower has been pollinated, it gives a different smell than when the flower is ready.
So how much UV radiation is getting reflected from the flower? That depends on what the source is?
But the source is, and how cloudy, how clear,
Okay.
and how high the sun is in
You
the sky.
just giving some students a project.
There you go. So these bees here are called the masked bees and the polyester bees. Polyester bees, these are the ones in the early spring that you can see. If you just take a lawn chair out on your front yard, sit down or sit on the ground, and you'll see all these little things going in and out of the ground, in and out, in and out, and you'll think flies. But if you could get close to it, they're actually these little bees going in and out. They nest in the ground. And they also use a lining. They have a secretion that they use to line their nest cells. That's why they're called polyester bees. These masked bees here, these ones love dill. I see them, I feel like that's one of their go-to plants is dill. These ones look more like wasps. They're super small. They're probably, this is a good, you can see that. They're that big.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
super small.
Like a
super
tick.
small. Yeah, tiny. But you probably wouldn't be able to see it anyway, but they don't have pollen collecting hairs. These actually collect the pollen in their crop like a bird, would store their food. So, but one way to notice them is they have these really distinct masks on their face. This is a female. She has 2 little lines, and the male would have this center portion, like the carpenter bee, covered. Sweat bees. So these you'll find all year round. They love all different types of plants. Generalists in this area. They are solitary and can be social. Super small. Again, this is actually a sweat bee. But you do get the metallic green sweat bees, which are beautiful. We have some over there. This is a picture of a male. The females are actually all metallic green. And again, you'll see these at a number of different flowers. And a lot of people think, you know, in the summer, they're like, oh, I don't want to go in the yard and sweat too much, so I'm going to get stung. The only reason why you get stung is if they land on you and you hit them. You know, if they're going to sting you if you hit them because you're squishing them, right? But this is actually a photo of my husband, and this was taken a couple weekends ago at Tower Grove Park. And this little sweat bee came and was lapping up some sweat, and then she went on her way. So just let them sit there. It's kind of fun to watch them, and then they're actually really, really cute. You can see them up close.
You can tell she loves bees.
Yeah, I do. These are called cuckoo bees or kleptoparasitic bees. So these don't really look like bees. These definitely look like wasps. And that's because they actually don't collect pollen. So the name klepto kind of gives it away. They steal pollen from other females. So these are very, very opportunistic bees. They hang around outside of the nests of other bees, and they'll kind of wait for the female to go. Watch her all day, working hard, going in and out with pollen loads. And then once she goes out again, this female will sneak in there, lay her egg, and either kill the egg of this other female, or when her eggs develop into larvae, they will kill the egg and then eat the pollen load. So very opportunistic bees, but they look like wasps, as you can see, and they fly really low to the ground. And unlike a wasp or flies, they kind of go like this, just buzz around because they're kind of patrolling the area. I described it yesterday as like watching a kid play with like a little remote control helicopter low to the ground or something. But yeah, they're also very beautiful, though, different colors. Yeah, so stinging bees. We're out in the field 5 days a week. We use a net, and when I say we use a net, I did this the other day. There was a big group of mint and basil and all sorts of other herbs, and tons of bees flying around on a super hot day. So I just took the net, it went like this, just to collect as many as I could. And I probably had at least 30 bees in the net, and none of them, you would think, if you're swatting them like that, you're just going to get swarmed and get attacked, right? They're only out to collect pollen or to get nectar and find a mate. They don't care about, it wastes so much energy for them to come and sting you and waste time out of their day. The only time, I've been doing this for 3 years now, and I got stung twice this year. I think I'm just getting too comfortable with it, but it was because I had one in the net and I didn't see it, and I went like this, and she got me, and then another time I just caught one with my I just wanted to see what kind it was, and then it was female. Yeah, so only females have stingers, the males don't. And there was actually a study done in 1997 that looked at the emergency room visits for bee stings, and they found actually that 90% of the bee sting visits were actually due to wasps and other things, so not bees. Anyone have questions? Yes.
Okay, I'm allergic to all of them. I've been tested from getting stung and having hives years ago. Luckily, it didn't hit my windpipe. And I haven't been stung since. I garden all the time, and I knew that about them coming out late, because once I see them coming by but they never bother me.
Yeah.
But then I go in. But my question is, the wasps.
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay to kill those?
I mean,
they scare me. I always, I'll get my husband I think there's a nest somewhere, find it and get rid of it. Because for some reason, they seem more random to me.
Yeah, they are more aggressive, especially if you have them like a lot of times I know they like to make their nest right above your front door. Very inconvenient for both parties. But yeah, and I've seen them come down and people see them just because you're right there and there, So if you're allergic, I would probably, suggest it, but.
So what is the purpose of wasps? What do wasps do?
Wasps are actually beneficial insects. They're considered beneficial insects by the bees because in the garden, they'll eat unwanted pets.
Oh, okay.
So it's like a whole, so it's a whole system, in one little garden.
Okay, so they're good to get the bad
So
bugs.
they're kind of like hawks.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, hawks of insect
A couple of years ago, there was this beautiful sweat bee that I was about to swipe and this giant wasp just came up. I'm like looking at the little tiny beautiful bee and this giant, it was a hornet, but it just came down and just grabbed it and kept on flying, like, up.
Yeah.
Yeah, is that, because that's actually what I'm I mean, that, there were 5 things, there were 3 kinds of hornets and maybe 2 kind of bees
Okay,
that I was when they tested me.
yeah.
It was
Hornets.
a long time ago, and maybe I'm not allergic anymore, I don't want to find out.
Hornets are, of the entire group, hornets are the most aggressive.
And those are ones when you're mowing your lawn and, you know, people, oh, that's swarmed by bees. It's not. It's because of bees
So
that.
do I have hornets in my yard too? I don't even know what a hornet is, actually.
They're real big.
You think that it's a wasp that is very stout.
Yeah,
Oh,
like a
okay.
robust.
Like a paper nest.
Yeah.
It basically looked like a basketball up in a tree.
Yeah,
Exactly, that's.
Oh, maybe we don't.
Yes.
I might have missed this, but when the bees collect the pollen
Uh-huh.
and they go back to their nest,
And
they're gonna store it for the eggs that are gonna hatch later, how do they get it off of them?
So it's pretty fun to watch. If you can watch them on a plant do this, because whenever they're like, with any other insect that collects nectar or that drinks nectar, they get pollen on their face and on their arms, and they actually have on their legs. They have these little areas like this. They're kind of cut out, and they're antenna cleaners. So they go like this with their antenna, and then they kind of so that gets stuck on one part of their body, and then they have 3 sets of legs. So then they use their second sets of legs and they do this little dance and then move it down like this to the bottom part. Yeah, so they just shimmy it off kind of. And then when they're in the nest, I would imagine it's probably a similar motion, to do
Take it
it.
off your dress. It's almost like.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So I have a question, since a lot of these live in the ground,
Uh-huh.
some of the like weed killers and stuff that
Yeah.
we're putting on our yard, is that
I would
affecting them?
imagine it wouldn't be
Yeah.
the best. I mean, I can't say 100% that it's.
Well,
Really detrimental,
is not the weed killer as much as the, what you call it, the sod wetworm and the sod wetworm pesticide and the grub, when we put stuff for the grubs. But usually you get that problem with grubs and sod wetworm when you have like only one type of grass. You know, especially if you get like, Bermuda grass or soja, or, you know, you only have one kind of grass that is solid, then sod webworm and, you know, Japanese beetle grubs, they will do a number on your lawn, and then you put that kind of pesticide down.
And that'll hurt the bees.
That hurts.
But the regular like fertilizers and weed killers,
I wouldn't suggest. But
Keep it
since I
to a
don't,
minimum.
yeah.
I mean, I really don't have an issue with any of that, as long as you're using the proper recommended dosage.
right?
There was a lady at,
Violet.
no, across from Malincrot.
Okay, yeah.
She has all these flowers. It's just like half a block down from, in front of the house. And roses are very susceptible to fungal
Right.
damage. I mean, it doesn't kill the plant, it just makes the flowers.
Look not so pretty.
And there's a fungicide that you can use
Yes.
when the bud is about to emerge, and you just squirt a little squirt on the bud, and that on each bud. That's it. And she was just spraying the whole plant up and down, up and down. So she was applying probably 100 times the recommended dosage. And I mean, and you can smell the smell of the fungicides.
Right.
So that's the problem, because, I mean, we need to use pesticides responsibly in the recommended dosage. And many times, you know, you get this concentrate, they say, well, you have to do this solution. And I've seen it at times that it comes in metric and not English system. And people are not used to milliliters versus, you know.
Right.
So we need to learn
How to,
take your time, learn how to apply it.
Yes.
What is the relationship between bees and bats? I'd like to have a bat house, but if I have bees that are interested in living in it, I don't want them to attack the bat.
No, I don't think you would have a problem with that at all, yeah.
They coexist.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
all the
even,
bats,
I don't know if the bees would even make a nest there if the bats were there.
Yeah.
So,
And all the bats we have here are insectivorous, so they eat insects.
So
And
I'm kinda like.
well, they're good for
mosquitoes,
mosquitoes,
they
yeah,
love,
they
and
love
because
mosquitoes.
bees are active during the day and bats are active during the night, so they don't even know they exist to each
Yeah.
other.
So they could live together just fine.
Well, I guess what I'm seeing here is, I thought I'm gonna help the bees and get a hive, but in fact, I should just be planting more flowers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
leave, and leave bare
The
ground,
hive isn't really the issue,
Yeah.
it's the flowers.
Exactly.
yeah.
So this is perfect segue for Damon to explain exactly what.
Yeah.
Excellent question.
I'll save myself some money.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly, now you're armed with a little bit of bee biology, natural
Yeah.
history. For the natural problem solvers in the room, you can begin to put things together. We as humans, our food, we need a diversity of different bee species in order to pollinate the plants and foods that we eat. Bees themselves, the wild bees, they need a diversity of plants, a diversity of flowers, a diversity from early spring to late fall. And they also, knowing that they live in small areas, like the area the size of this room or the area the size of this table, that means there's something that we can do. What the research is showing, oh, did you have a question? Yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
yeah, because if we're gonna plant more flowers, so we have more bees in the size of this room, how's that gonna help the map that you showed in the beginning, which is where all the farmers and the farmland is lacking the bees? How's that helping those outer
So,
areas?
so,
Connect
so
that
we'll
dot.
get there, That's
Yeah,
perfect
we are
question.
headed there. Is that related question?
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys are too fast.
Yeah.
They're too good.
They're too good. The consistent driver of pollinator health is what all the studies are showing again and again, is that it's floral resources. It's the presence of flowers for forage. Makes sense, these populations need food. This is the consistent driver. So that is really, that piece of information and a lot of what we told you is really the driving force behind the questions that we're asking in this research project. That's funded by the Missouri Department of Conservation. We have 1 year to have these meetings with folks and talk about our research and talk about bee conservation. And that is essentially because we know citywide bee diversity. We have 30 sites now throughout the city. Can we target areas with education, like these bee conservation workshops, talk about our work, talk about bees, to where people would voluntarily change their lawn care practices or some aspect of their lawn care practices, plants and flowers, and increases floral diversity, which would then increase these target sites' bee diversity. So this is essentially the question that we're asking with this project that we're only doing in Ward 23, only doing in Holly Hills. So here's where we are now in our first intervention site. We decided to go with 2 intervention sites that had consistently the lowest number of unique bee species. So the lowest species diversity of all of our 30 sites is actually this site right here, and then second lowest is Holly Hills. So not 100% sure why. That's part of what we're trying to figure out. We also have control sites where we're not talking with people, we're not encouraging people, anything, we're not having any contact with them. Although anyone could come to these workshops, of course. So here in Ward 23, we have been sampling the Mallinckrodt Elementary School site for the past 4 years now. So we have long-term data, and we know the number of species, the different types of bees in this area. And what we're really interested in are folks that are within a 500 meter and 1,000 meter radius of that site, because that's about the average body size of a bee, the average size that they forage. And as Gerardo said, honeybees will go up to 2 miles to find food. But for most of the other bees, smaller areas. Our second area is in Holly Hills, and that is at the Bates and Arendez site. There's a community garden there, so that's the place where we're really focusing our efforts. But of course, if you're out here somewhere, what you're planting could have an impact. It could help bring some of the other species to these areas. So here is just kind of the photos of the different species of bees that have been found here from Mallinckrodt, 15 versus 24. This is just from these are last year's data. And at other sites, far more in the 40s, some a little bit higher. So what we're asking folks to do is to plant flowers with high food value for bees. And as Paige talked about, particularly for the social bees like bumblebees, they really depend on early season flowers, but all those that are emerging early in the spring, they need that early season flowers and forage. And also important are species that bloom late in the fall. But really, it's a diversity of plants, it's a diversity of flowers, it's a diversity of flower sizes, because different sized bees are attracted to different sized flowers. So larger flowers, bigger bees, smaller flowers, smaller bees. And so if you want to target a certain type of bees, you can begin thinking on that level as well. So we're asking people to plant in large clumps, as Gerardo talked about, because that's how bees can find that area. A diversity of flowers, and we're asking folks as well, natives are important just as far as less management. Those are the seeds that we have for you, are native mixtures. We're asking folks to be patient too. Sometimes it does take time to establish these gardens. And a kind of a bigger picture, because of the importance of food security and the role of pollinators, we're kind of seeing if we can change the way that we think about our lawns just in general, and our yards in general. Because, again, small areas can have an impact. One person could have an impact on planting. We're asking people to think about their lawns, to whatever degree they're comfortable, a little bit differently. Something from this to something that may look like this. Or something like this that could be planted from a group of neighbors could get together on an area that really hasn't had just been grass, or you could find a dead space in your lawn that's really not usable to you. We're just supplementing kind of traditional iris beds with some natives. This is in front of Schlafly Bottle Works. This was a year ago, and so if you've been there recently, you know that it's grown up quite a bit. So this is kind of the spacing that they planted in the courts. And they put a sign there to let people know, hey, we're planting for pollinators. It may look a little wonky right now. A little bit of patience. We also have signs available for folks. If you want a sign to take and put in your yard, if you're going to do major changes, we're happy to give you one. Just give us your name and address so we know kind of where they all are so we can map them out later. But yeah, you can have them and keep them forever. The second thing we're asking folks to do are to manage their lawns differently. Grass has most of our lawns, particularly older lawns, have a lot of valuable flowers and species that are very valuable to bees. And even though we've called them weeds for many years, they still have flowers that are valuable. Paige mentioned the importance of early spring dandelions. If you're nervous about them, get them right before they go to seed, the buckthorn as well, the buckhorn, the narrow-leaf plantain, those get a lot of bees. I've seen quite a few on those, the smaller ones. Of course, the white clover, yellow, the wood sorrel. We just saw some out in front of the church this morning on this. Many of these species are valuable.
Isn't that first big one the one that you get every spring that's everywhere?
Yeah, Charlie, you'll see it in farm fields. Just
Yeah.
everywhere. Yeah. And we're asking folks to slow their mow as well, to mow at greater increments of time, because lawns have this valuable forage. So there was a study done in 2014 from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst at Springfield, Massachusetts. They worked with a bunch of homeowners, and they had homeowners in 3 groups. The control group would mow their lawns once a week. The second group would mow their lawn once every 2 weeks. And the third group would mow their lawn once every 3 weeks. And they had researchers come out and sample the bees in between each of the mowing. So for those that mowed once every 1 week, that was their control group. But those who mowed once every 2 weeks, they saw a 60% increase in the number of unique bee species just from mowing less. And for those that mowed once every 3 weeks, in addition to possibly upsetting their neighbors, they found a 300% increase in the number of unique bee species just from mowing less. Of course, they had signs out front saying they're participating in this study. So if you don't like mowing the lawn,
Yeah.
take a week off. Take a couple
Get
of
in-
weeks
get in
off.
the study.
You may want to communicate with your neighbors. You may want to communicate with your older persons to say, hey, I'm participating in this bee study. Yeah, question?
Does that matter if you have, or is it more beneficial if you have a ton of weeds in your lawn, or even if you have a rather nice lawn?
It's going to be better with weeds. It's going to be better with
We're
weeds
killing the clover.
rather than just straight sod.
Mhm.
And what's nice about the homes in your neighborhood as well as in Holly Hills is because the way that they planted the grasses, there was a mixture of grasses planted in 30s, 40s, 50s, all the way in the 80s, where they had mixtures of white clover in it, and that kept the lawn green throughout the year, as well as fixed nitrogen to feed the rest of the grasses. So that mixture of a diversity of plants in the lawn is beneficial, and particularly for these older neighborhoods.
So no more killing the clover.
I'm not saying it has to be like this. I'm not saying it has to be like this. Yeah.
Back up, what about the nitrogen? Is it okay to be putting that kind of thing on your lawn then for
Well-
our bees that go into the ground?
Yeah.
So it's okay to do some fertilizing, especially if you're applying it usually in the later in the spring. But most of the regimes that they recommend, like fertilize 4 or 5 times a year, that's ridiculous. And most of that nitrogen ends up in the Mississippi and then down in the Gulf.
Well, I think your point was with clover. Clover has a nitrogen
Nitrogen
fixing
fixing,
system in its root.
Right, correct. Exactly. And
Right,
it's
so
better.
with that
Because
diversity, you won't need.
Basically, air is 80% nitrogen.
Yeah.
So it's taking the nitrogen out of the air and putting it into
Yep.
the roots.
The roots, yeah.
Nitrogen mixed all legumes.
All legumes do that,
We have to
including clover.
educate.
Yeah, so that's why,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, but if you have a diverse mixture of grasses and a few forbs in there, your lawn will stay greener, just naturally.
So I mean, consider it, could look something like this. Just reimagining your lawn could have an impact. Third, we're asking folks to avoid the neonicotinoids. Right now, that's going to be difficult because they're everywhere, it seems. Again, they're very effective, it's great technology, and we have tremendous access to them. So just taking a look at a photo of a big box store shelf, the red X's are the imidacloprids, and the yellows, they're acetaminopриds. And so you can see what's kind of left over when you strike those out. They will be labeled on these chemical in the containers. Yep.
I noticed the sunflowers we planted this morning were from France,
Okay.
and the mixed flowers were from Holland. So I'm wondering if you said that the Europeans have outlawed it, that
Yeah.
they're going there for their source of seeds to sell in the stores.
Yeah, I think that would increase your odds. Yeah, if it's coming out of Europe. Yeah.
And one thing too, I know a lot of people love to go to Home Depot and Lowe's for plants for your garden, but I would suggest not, because they do now at Home Depot is starting to label what plants are treated with neonicotinoids, but when I bought one there, it's like hidden inside of the container, and so you don't really know when you first buy it. And also there's a nursery, and in particular there's one, Bowood Farms in the Central West End, and they have one section that's devoted to native plants, Missouri native plants, so they're all grown here in Missouri, locally sourced, and they're obviously beneficial for bees and other insects. And they're actually, I mean, you would think, oh, plant nursery's gonna be more expensive. They're actually quite cheap, like $5, $6 for coneflowers or blazing stars, and even they have the drop seeds, the grasses, and everything there.
What's the name of that again, please?
Bowood Farms.
Would you spell it?
Yes, BOWOOD. And it's on Washington Avenue. It's like hidden in the back of Central West End, kind of. But it's a really neat place. Oh, yeah, maybe it's olive.
I guess where olive becomes, but
Oh,
back
right,
in
it
there.
splits, yeah.
As well, many of the plants that you buy, the live plants, are treated with neonicotinoids, as Paige said. You have to. Some places have tags, but not required to tag them. there's a brand called Monrovia that is distributed widely, and
Right.
they do not treat with neonicotinoids.
Oh, that's
Now,
So they're
the
good.
big box stores have agreed to phase out all these plants, so Ace, Home Depot, Lowe's, but that's in 2019, 2020, and 2021. So until those years, you have to be vigilant about what you buy and where you buy. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned, native, plants, you know, a lot of people are using those. If you use a cultivar of a native plant, are they as beneficial to the bees?
Yeah.
Some, the thing is, some cultivars have been selected for like very large or showy flowers are not as good as producing nectar. You know, so you have to be careful some of those, so.
One thing to do, is if you go to, I know Home Depot has a section, I was just there this week and so I know all this stuff, but they have a section that says pollinator plants, which I looked at, and I'm like, I don't know, I don't think half of these are really good for pollinators, but I know, like at Bowood, they have a huge open area and you can walk through, and one thing to do, especially if you go during the day, is just to look at the plants, and you'll see tons of bees buzzing around. So if the bees are going to them there, they're gonna go to them in your garden, so that's a key thing to do.
And
What about-
Roman and Webster's good for that too.
Oh, good.
Or that place in Richmond Heights, apparently Operation Brightside recommended we buzz fly. I thought milkweed was that stuff on our fence where it opens up and has go. I didn't know it was a pinky, orangey.
There are a lot of.
Who knew?
There's a lot of varieties.
And you can, they told them, our neighbor went to the Operation Brightside program, and they told him to go at, whatever it's called there, it's on Big Bend in Richmond Heights. Garden Heights, yeah, and they had all kinds of,
Yeah, they're
what's the
funny.
Latin name, it starts with an A?
Asclepias.
Asclepias, yeah.
That's milkweed, yeah.
Milkweed, yeah, I always heard they could see it from a mile up, and I thought, how did they see this white flaky? Well, duh.
UV light.
That was,
What about Bear's Garden Shop? I know they have a lot of Monrovia. Do they have the other?
Yeah, you'd have to check, but if they're carrying Monrovia, I think.
They
that
have a
must
lot of-
be it.
Well, so like our vegetable plants, I mean, I try to buy as many heirloom plants as possible, but like a lot of our plants that we buy are cultivated. Are those,
Well, the interesting thing about cultivated plants is that we select for the fruit,
right,
not the flower.
right,
So it's meant to attract the native, they attract bees. And I mean, and tomatoes are native,
but
believe it or not,
those are
peppers
still
native.
good for
Yeah.
the bees though? I mean,
Yeah,
there's nothing,
yeah.
okay.
So what, before you get off
Yep.
the insecticides, we planted a milkweed last year, specifically for the butterflies and the bee, it did okay last year, but at the end of the season, it got these little yellow bugs, which I heard are, aphids. So this year it has come out beautiful.
Yeah.
But
After the rabbit ate it all the way to nothing.
oh, yeah. But then we found it comes out from the ground in the spring, so we were okay. But now it's covered in them again, so what do we use?
Soapy water.
So can
Soapy.
you
Like
make
Dawn
your own?
or?
My grandma used to tell us that.
Yeah,
She grew up on a
exactly.
farm.
Dawn, fantastic.
Dawn
I
is
know
the
it's
best.
slow down, but while we're here, why is Europe so far ahead of us with banning these things? Where have we been?
They're ahead of us in everything,
Everything.
food, the
It's a policy
pesticide.
question, I could,
Yeah,
they
Did you
work
have-
off the precautionary principle, whereas they're more precautionary, so
Yeah.
instead
They're
of.
ahead of us in our
Reaction,
food
instead of
supply.
reactionary.
Whereas we're a little more
Reactionary.
reactionary, we'll let the market flourish a little bit and then we find out.
But it's just like
Almighty
food.
dollar.
They're beginning to change the stuff that's in food because
They're
people aren't
way
buying
ahead of
it
us with
and they're
what's in
losing
our
money.
food.
That's the only thing
what?
that's gonna
What's
change
in
it.
food,
Exactly.
way
The
ahead of
market,
us.
sooner or later.
The market will eventually, yeah.
Correct.
We have, I think like 5 more slides here, maybe not 10.
This is a good.
Next thing we want you to do is leave some bare ground, because most are ground nesters, leaving bare ground, not mulching every square inch, particularly around the plants that you want pollinated, would be important. They'll use these spaces, as you can see, This one here is from Malencrop. This is of the hibiscus
Shouldn't have
bee.
done that.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all
Hibiscus bee.
Like a
So-
rose of Sharon.
So I don't have to feel guilty that I didn't get my mulching done.
That's right.
Yes.
Will they burrow into the ground in a shady area versus an all sun area, or?
They prefer all sun. They like a sunny spot, usually.
And how big of an area?
That spot there where that picture was taken, it was probably, it was quite patchy, but I would say the majority of the area where the nests were was just this big, and then there were smaller patches about like this size just throughout the front yard of the school, about this size, and you could see a couple nests there, so.
But you need that to be bare like that the whole year round.
Yes,
Yeah.
and don't disturb it, don't dig it, don't.
Put it in
So
an
don't
out
put
of the
your
way
leaves on
place.
top of
Oh,
the
right.
winter though.
Should we pull weeds out of it and make it
You
really
shouldn't
bare
put the
first?
leaves on there in the winter.
That's, yeah, that'd be
You
a
could,
Or that's a
you
different-
could keep a bare spot,
Keep it bare year
and if you have a little like bird bath, that's good, because they like clay soil, and so they have to use water to moisten the soil to actually dig the nest in, so.
And also in the fall, when, leave a pile of leaves in a corner. Some bees will go in there.
Oh,
too.
well, yeah, because earlier she said leave the
Yeah,
leaves,
yeah.
so we need both.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then another thing we're asking is you make some bee condos or buy some. These are easily made. You can drill holes into firewood. There's all kinds of instructional videos on YouTube. We have one linked on our site. And it may take a couple of years, 1, 2, 3 years before it gets inhabited. But just be patient, keep it in a dry area, be south facing, keep it in sunlight, make sure no water can run into
Yeah,
it
lady,
as well.
yesterday had one with mason bees for the last couple of years, first
But
coming
it
back
does
and forth.
take a while, so that's
It does
good
take a
to
while.
know.
Yes, take a while for them to, yeah.
So, to summarize the research that we're doing in your communities, we've been sampling these areas across the city. We are documenting to some degree the front yards of basic yard management. We're encouraging you all to plant, reduce mowing, leave some bare ground, leave leaves. We will continuously sample. We're sampling at least this year as well as next year. We will continue to monitor these populations in the future. This is our goal as a larger research lab. We're going to keep this long-term pending funding. And then what we hope to do is be able to suggest management practices that have worked in certain areas, particularly if we can see an increase in the level of bee species in the 2 target areas. We are, as Gerardo had mentioned, we are working with an international group of about 30 to 40 different researchers who are doing urban bee research in different cities throughout the world, Singapore, Australia, all throughout the UK, Europe, and all throughout the United States and Costa Rica. And so what we're doing here and working with you is unique. There's people have similar amounts of collections, very few, just really one actually. This lab is highly productive in terms of sampling these bees, and then this step of moving them forward into trying to work with communities to experiment, can we actually increase the population of diverse bees is very unique. So what happens here is being watched from other folks worldwide. Yeah.
I was thinking the Lindenwood Park Neighborhood Association has a garden contest every year, which I'm still bitter about because I didn't get considered. I didn't have a water feature. I mean, I had a fountain, but I didn't have a water feature. But I'm thinking maybe, and I'd be glad to talk to them. They could have a category for, those of us that have a more random looking. But I'm realizing some of my laziness has actually been good. I mean, I just stick stuff in and then it, but it's other stuff, and it's a real old garden. The house is almost 100 years old. Next year it'll be, but we're only the 3rd people that have owned it, so.
We'd love to talk with the organizers and put them in touch with me.
But I think that'd be a great idea, because what they put their seal on, which is, natural, but it's what people do, is the beautiful manicured looking, which,
That is a good idea.
What about Tilly's
Well,
Park?
I know, great.
Oh, this
I'll work with
this
you.
next one will
Oh,
go
okay.
exactly to the heart of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and we'll talk about Tillis Park. Before you leave though, if you have to leave early, we do have an exit survey we want folks to fill out, just 2 questions on it. But that's important to us. We will talk about Tillis.
Yeah.
want to show you just a tale of two gardens here. One is Lindenwood Park Community Garden, the other is Tower Grove East. You can kind of see similar areas. Maybe this one here is closer to the park. 4 bee species found in Lindenwood Park and 20 species found in the other. And just kind of looking at the difference, and these are Lindenwood Park, you can see kind of has a large amount of concrete around here, so maybe that's not, whereas there are multiple yards here, spaces for other bees. You can look at kind of the neighborhood composition. Looks relatively similar. But looking on the ground, you see some clover here, but it's managed well, whereas this one here is kind of wild looking. And
It's being corrected.
Lindenwood Park.
It's still gonna be managed, but we're gonna have a lot of beds with flowers.
Well, it looks a
That's
lot
gonna
better,
work.
it looks a lot more stuff this
Mhm.
year, and there's milkweed, isn't there, over by
Uh-huh.
the compost,
Yeah.
I saw?
So in this is a number of ways of just managing differently,
Yeah.
but also trying to change the way that we think about what the aesthetic of a
Neatness
good-looking
does not
yard or a
count.
highly productive garden may look like.
Yeah.
I imagine the tomatoes in here, just with the number of species, are gonna, maybe the produce will look differently. I don't know if we could even start taking pictures of
Sure.
one place and the other, but I'm glad you guys are working on it. And then finally, additional steps, we'd love for you guys to sign up through our website.
Is that information on these papers?
It is on a card that we
Yeah, this
have.
one. This card.
Yes, that's
Oh,
it.
okay.
That card.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have a postcard with it. We'll grab some here. And we'll show it to you again. It'll be on the next slide as well with a larger font. So sign up. We'll keep you in touch with what we're doing and how the research is moving forward and kind of what we're finding, particularly probably in the winter, because we've got thousands and thousands of bees to count. So after we find out the numbers. And then if you're in the study area and you're managing for pollinators and you're planning to do something differently with your lawn or your garden or a space that you manage at work or you have access to, take a sign. I mean, let us know. We want to document who has the signs, but take a sign. We have poles as well and hardware. We'd love to have you advertise and let your neighbors know.
Yeah, then we'll start talking about it.
Yeah,
Right.
That's,
Talk to your neighbors about this study. Take any extra materials you need. Take extra seeds. We will have this video posted probably in mid-August. Give us about 2 or 3 weeks. We're going to clean up some things. But we'll have the video posted for folks that couldn't make this meeting, folks that can't get out to this meeting as well.
Are there things like you can share on Facebook, for example, to get the word out?
We would love for you to start it. Share. We have.
Are you just sharing the
Instagram
link
account.
or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Share the link. It's
And what's your Instagram?
we have Bees on the Block.
Bees on the Block?
Bees on the Block is the Instagram. And we have a Twitter as well that Andrea, I don't know the handle. We don't know the handle right now.
Instagram would be perfect for pictures.
It should be on the website too.
And that's what we would love. If you have pictures of your yard, as you have changed it over time, we'd love to see any types of photos of that, just so other people can see what types of options they can do.
Yeah.
And one thing too, now that you guys know you can save so much time and you don't have to manage your yards as much, instead of, mulching or mowing or spraying, just take a chair out where you have a flower bed and next to your flowers, have a seat, bring your camera out, and just watch the bees. Spend like 30 minutes or an hour, however long you want. Watch the bees because they're fascinating, and a lot of them have different ways they collect pollen. Some go like this, others go.
bring your bee guide,
Yeah,
with you and your
exactly.
camera.
Yeah, post up pictures, but yeah.